Welcome to this channel, and in this video we are going to be taking a question on inverse of functions based on rational functions. Now here is the question. F of x is equal to 8x plus 3 over 9x plus 6, and the question is find f inverse of x. Remember, I put out a video on inverse of functions and I gave some examples, but we noticed that in those examples you could see that the inverse was equal to the original function, and that is actually possible for those of you that watched my first video on inverse of functions. Right, so let's see how this one goes now. So following the principle, all we will now say is let f of x be y, right? It's still y is equal to 8x plus 3 over 9x plus 6. Then the next thing now is to make x the subject of the formula by first of all multiplying through, right? So that will be y into 9x plus 6 is equal to what? 8x plus 3. Then with that, on expansion, we now have 9xy plus y times 6 is 6y is equal to 8x plus 3. Right? So we bring everything that contains x to one side, and that will be 9xy minus 8x will be equal to 3. Then the 6y crosses over to become 3 minus 6y. Do you grab? Then factor out 6. On factoring out x, that will be x into 9xy divided by x, that will be 9y. And then negative 8x divided by x will give us negative 8 is equal to what? 3 negative 6y. Then making x the subject, that will be dividing through by 9y negative 8. 9y negative 8, right? And that will be x equal to 3 negative 6y over 9y negative 8. Hence, f inverse of x is equal to 3 minus 6x over 9x minus 8. And that's the answer. So in the exam, they could give you this function, and then maybe they will write f of x is equal to 8x plus 3 over 9x plus 6. So let's say we are now asked to find f inverse of minus 1. So anywhere we see x in the inverse function, we replace it with minus 1, and that will be 3 minus 6 into minus 1 over 9 into minus 1 minus 8. Minus times minus is plus, right? So that's 3 plus 6 times 1, which is 6. That's 3 plus 6 times 1, which is 3 plus 6, 9. Over 9 times negative 1 is negative 9, negative 8. And that will be 9 over negative 9, negative 8 is negative 17. And our final answer is negative 9 over what? 17. Still same thing. Right? So you have seen our answer to that for the inverse of the function. So what we noticed here, right? The question I asked that we solved in parts in my video on how to determine the inverse of functions, where I had y equal to 3x plus 2 over x minus 3. You will notice that when we cross multiplied, we will now get xy minus 3y is equal to what? 3x plus 2, and that will be xy minus 3x, because we are isolating x, is equal to 3y plus 2. And then on factor, we now have x into y minus 3 equal to 3y plus 2, right? And that will be x equal to 3y plus 2 over y minus 3, which gives us an inverse of what? 3x plus 2 over what? X, which is the original function. I see what happened right there. So you notice that when you get the graph of this, the inverse is still going to be the same. When you, even though after exchanging coordinates, you're still going to have the same function, right? It's just like if you have 0 0, you have 1 1. If you want to find the inverse, it will also be 0 0 and 1 1, right? So it's possible for the inverse to be equal to the original function. And for a rational function, if you have a rational function in the form y equal to ax plus b all over cx minus d, where a, b, c, and d are constants, and a and d is equal to negative a, right? You would see that the inverse of that function will be equal to the original function, right? Just like we had 3x plus 2 over x minus 3. You see that the 3 now, in this case, ax plus 2, ax plus b over cx plus d. In this case, a was what? 3, while d was what? Minus 3. was 3, D was what? Minus 3, which the opposite sign. So that's an indication that the inverse will be equal to the what? To the original function. Thank you so much for watching. Please do well to subscribe this channel all you need to do is to click the subscribe button, like and share this video, and thank you so much for watching. Have a nice day.